Hey everybody, welcome back to the Morgan Ortagus Show. I appreciate you watching. I'm very excited to have someone on who you've probably seen on your television set for the last 20 years, but she also is an alumni of many, many administrations. She was a baby when she did this, but she was all the way back into the Nixon administration, where she was a national security official, the Reagan administration, and of course in the Trump administration as his very first deputy national security advisor and most influential, I would say, as well. And of course, you have seen her for probably 15 years on Fox News. Welcome to the Morgan Ortagus Show.
Well, it is terrific to be with you. I think of you as my third daughter when we campaigned together in 2006. And my blonde daughters, no one thought were mine. And everyone assumes you were my daughter, so I took great pride in that.
So most people don't know this. I was KT's press secretary on her Senate race against Hillary Clinton in 2006. I always say I'm sad to report that we did not beat Hillary in
Yeah.
2006, but later we defeated her in 2016.
Exactly, and that was sweet.
So you have been, I think, what's fascinating, and I want to go back, I want to start with the Trump administration, but I also want to go back and talk about the many administrations that you've served in. But I think one of the fascinating things about you is you are a day one Trump administration national security official, even back to the campaign. You started advising him. So before it was cool to be a Trump official, you were there. And I remember vividly that we were having coffee at Fox News one day and we were talking about Trump, and you said to me back in 2015, before so many people got on the bandwagon, you said, Morgan, he reminds me of Reagan. This is a return back to Reagan foreign policy. You said that, gosh, almost a decade ago now, back in 2015. What about Donald Trump led you to know early on that his foreign policy and national security was going to be as successful as it was?
Yeah, now I would preface all this by saying temperamentally and personality-wise, I couldn't be more different. Yes. But the policies were absolutely the same. I mean, Donald Trump, because he didn't come from the political world, because he came from the business world, and Reagan, because he didn't come from the political world, really. He came from, you know, the acting world and Hollywood. They both had very different perspectives than the average Washington politician. And so they both understood the power that the United States had, and particularly the economic power. So Reagan won the Cold War by focusing on what we were really good at, which was our technology and our economy. And by using those against the weakness of the Soviet Union, which was their weak technology and extremely weak economy, that's how we won the Cold War. And so Donald Trump comes in, and first of all, it's the same campaign theme, Make America Great. Now, when I asked President Trump before he was president, I said, I think it's so great that you're doing that, you know, homage to Ronald Reagan. And he looked at me like, what? What are you talking about? That was my idea. So I think that even though President Trump followed a lot of the Reagan policies, I think he got there on his own. He wasn't studying Reagan to think, how am I going to do it? He got there on his own. So what Trump set out to do from the very beginning was to take advantage of a couple of things America had, one of which was this sudden success in the energy industry. So because of fracking, we knew we could always get oil and natural gas out of rocks, which was always too expensive. But it started becoming feasible economically in about 2015 or so. And so Trump understood that was a total game changer. If we could do that, if the United States could get cheap, safe, secure, reliable, abundant oil and natural gas out of shale rock, we could then not only become energy independent, we could become energy dominant, that we could set the price of global oil. As a result of that, you bankrupt Russia, you bankrupt Iran. Both countries need oil exports to succeed. Yeah. And you also get Europe off of the political leverage that Russia had, because that's how the oil was supplied. And the good news is that China, one of the most energy needy countries in the world, we have enormous leverage over them by using that energy. So President Trump put all that in place, and anybody who remembers those, you know, gasoline at $1.50 a gallon, $2 a gallon, that was Trump's energy policy. And as a result of that, why didn't Russia invade Ukraine? They couldn't have afforded it. They didn't have the money. Exactly. Why did Iran not launch attacks on Israel and use They didn't have the money. In fact, we were hearing that as oil went down to $40 a barrel, that Hamas and Hezbollah were complaining, saying, where's our money? Where's our money from Iran? Iran didn't have the money.
Yeah. I want to sort of pull back the curtain for the audience. You know, when it came out that you were in the first wave of appointments and you were going to be Deputy National Security Advisor, and I remember thinking, oh boy, because that is, in my mind, I think that in many ways is one of the toughest jobs, if not the toughest job. Chief of Staff is also obviously an enormous job. National Security Advisor is an important job, but what people don't see is the deputy is the person running the NSC, right? And you're running, all the agencies are coming to the White House. It is an enormous job to take on. Luckily, you had many administrations, but pull back the curtain for us and tell us, what was it like in early days to try to take Trump campaign promises and turn them into reality?
Well, part of it was that Donald Trump would have sort of a broad brush stroke. I mean, he, for example, was the first guy to say, China, China, China. China's a real issue. Everybody at the time, whether it was Republican or Democrat, were saying, oh, you know, they're our competitors, they're not going to eat our lunch, Joe Biden famously said. But Donald Trump understood the economic threat that China provided. So he had a lot of broad brush strokes: energy, China, try to have a peace agreement in the Middle East, try to bankrupt Iran, go after ISIS, go after Islamic terrorism, and then we had to fill in the details. And you're very nice to say that, because the Deputy National Security Advisor is the one who does fill in the details. Yeah. There's a Secretary of State, as you know, you were at the State Department. The Secretary of State goes all around the world and deals with our allies and our adversaries. The National Security Advisor is at the President's elbow, dealing with the crisis of the moment. But the Deputy National Security Advisor is the one who's supposed to come up with the great policies and the great strategies and then work through the government, implementing them as well as...
It's a tedious job.
Yeah.
You know, it's so rare to have someone that has firsthand experience with 3 presidents. So I'm curious, sort of wait, who's the fourth?
Nixon.
Nixon?
Ford.
Ford, of course. Oh gosh.
And then Reagan.
Mic drop. So with 4 presidents, you're right. So I'm just kind of curious, what are the differences and similarities between the 4? Like, you know, what was, me and so many other people, I didn't meet Nixon, Ford, or Reagan, so what were they like?
Probably weren't even alive when
well, okay, not Nixon.
Right.
I was alive in Reagan.
Okay, so President Nixon was very involved in the fine details. So I worked for him. I would often be there late at night and would take memoranda into the Oval Office. And he would pore over everything. He would mark everything up. He was a master of the final details. Huh. And he was, I think, was very effective.
A micromanager?
Well, not a micromanager, because he had Henry Kissinger to carry everything out. But he was a hands-on president.
Interesting.
President Ford, who came in after President Nixon was forced to resign, really was not a micromanager, and he really let Kissinger and others continue on with the very successful foreign policies they had. You know, opening to China, arms control agreement with the Soviet Union, Middle East peace, end of the Vietnam War, and so I think those policies just continued with Ford. Reagan came in, and Reagan was, the great thing about Reagan is, like Trump, he thinks totally outside the box. So for Reagan, he wanted to, fix the economy. That was Trump's plan too. Fix the economy with tax cuts, deregulation, and encouraging having a really pro-business economy. And then using that economic advantage and sudden economic success, then he was able to then have a defense buildup, which was very important to winning the Cold War, and then he could economically target the Soviet Union at the time. But the thing about Reagan is that he too was a big picture guy. So unlike Nixon, who was very into the details, Reagan just set the big broad brush strokes. You were supposed to figure out how to do it. The great think outside of the box part about Reagan was 2 things. One, there was a throwaway line where people said, well, you know, what do you know about foreign policy? How are you going to deal with the Soviet Union in the Cold War? He said, it's going to be simple. You know, we win, they lose. You guys figure out the details. The other thing that he did was he took the idea that at the time we kept the peace with, the Soviet Union both had nuclear weapons armed up to the gazilles, and Reagan said, wouldn't it be great if we could find a way to defend against this, have a missile shield? And that was the Star Wars initiative. Both of those really put normal foreign policy on its head. So Donald Trump comes in, again, temperamentally very different, but broad brush strokes, and understood that the United States has superior economy and superior technology. Use those because nobody else has those. And then all the knock-on effects happen especially with cheap oil. You know, the Abraham Accords, which you were very closely involved in negotiating. That was because the Sunni Arabs, the Saudis and others, realized that if oil was always going to be $40 a barrel, they needed to find some new line of work because they needed it above $80 a barrel to support their economy. But how do you do that? You need to have peace in the Middle East. How do you do that? You need Abraham Accords with Israel.
You know, speaking of Israel, there's a story that I've heard from you for Celeste. We've been working together almost 20 years at this point. And I hope you remember the story because I remember you telling it over the years. But there was this beautiful moment whenever I believe you were in the Reagan administration, maybe Ford, when you met Golda Meir.
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell that story? I love that story.
Okay, so
it was Ford.
So
okay.
It was Ford administration. So Golda Meir, who had been prime minister during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and Henry Kissinger, my boss, was the one who negotiated all the peace agreements and the disengagement agreements. So Golda left office. She was old and really didn't leave, although she should have left with a flurry of excitement and thrills that she had been such a great prime minister. She did not. She was really in disfavor in Israel. She wrote her memoirs, and she then went, as former prime minister, she went to see Ford, President Ford. And again, I was always working late, so I'm walking into the cabinet room, and I see this little old lady, sort of with like gray hair coming out of her head, and she had these old sort of, you know, cleaning lady shoes on, and I thought, oh my gosh, this must be the cleaning lady, the night shift cleaner, and she's taking a break because it's now 10 o'clock at night. And then I looked at her a little more closely and I said, oh my Lord, that's Golda Meir. So I ran back to my office, got her memoirs, said, would you please sign? And she did. And then she took her hands and she said, will you promise me you will always be a friend of Israel? And I thought, what a throwaway line. Of course I'll always be a friend of Israel. And I've been thinking so much about that in the last year.
Yes.
Israel needs all the friends it can get right now. Yeah. And I made that promise to Golda Meir, and I'm going to keep it.
Oh, man, what a story. You know, one of the things I think that our audience probably doesn't know that I'd like to expand on. So we mentioned I worked for KT when she was running against Hillary for the Senate in New York, and I was like 23. It was my first job out of Florida, and I just wanted to be you. I studied everything you had done in your career, you know, Oxford, your education, everything you had done in foreign policy, and I really mirrored my career and my life off of what you did. You were such an example to me. Even small things, I remember, and you know, Katie, and you and your husband have been blessed and successful. I lived with you in this gorgeous apartment on the Upper East Side, but even back then, I remember you said to me, remember, I'm just a girl from a small, you know, from a milk farm, you know. I used to milk cows in Wisconsin, right?
Wisconsin, good.
And I remember you always saying that, like, don't let any of the entrapments fool you. That's who I really am. And one of the things that you taught me back then, and I say this a lot when I have these women's dinners in DC, is you said to me, Morgan, I grew up in an era when there was only one woman allowed at the table. And so we were all fighting each other to have that spot. But you have always been so good about bringing up other women because you didn't want the women to have to compete for that one spot. So I'm curious what the difference was for you as a female leader in national security in those earlier administrations compared to the Trump administration when obviously things had changed quite a bit for women.
Well, so I went to college in the late 60s, early 70s, and at that time, there were not equal opportunities for women. I mean, educationally. For example, I went to Oxford University, but the Rhodes Scholarship was not open to women. It was only open to men. So I got other scholarships. I managed to go to Oxford. But at the time, when I graduated from college, at that time, women could be secretaries, administrative assistants, teachers, nurses, but they could never be the principal.
Right.
That was always for the guy. And the best you could hope for, with the guy you were sitting next to in class, he probably didn't do as well as you. You did a lot better than he did, but you were going to be his secretary. But there were it just was the glass ceiling was just starting to crack a little. And the sad thing was there was always either no women in the room or only one woman in the room. And women really looked at each other. And it's like the survival of the fittest. It's going to be you or me. And so they really did go after each other. The wonderful thing I see with you and with my daughters, who are about your age, is that they have a very different approach. They're not worried. They're having the opportunities. In fact, they have too many opportunities. Women in your generation, you know, you've got you've got terrific academic credentials. You've got a wonderful husband. You've got a magnificent daughter, but you've got a rock star career. How do you balance everything?
Right.
In my era, you usually chose family or career. I was lucky enough to have both, but I guess I'm just so excited to think that the doors that are now open for women, and it's first of all, it makes a much better country to have
Yeah.
women in positions of power and authority. But I'm very proud when I see someone like you who's managed to have it all.
Well, I've only managed to have it all because KT McFarland had it all first and paved the way and broke that glass ceiling for so many women like me in national security. So welcome, of course, for the first time, definitely not the last time, to the Morgan Ortagus Show. You can see now why I wanted to have her on the show. Please come back soon. And I know I speak for so many people around America that really want you back in the next Trump administration.
Well, let's have another Trump administration.
Yes.
We'll all go back together.
Thank you, KT McFarland.
Thank you very much.